This is the multiple award-winning GardenDC podcast, the podcast about everything gardening in the Mid-Atlantic region and beyond. I'm your host, Kathy Jentz. I'm the editor of Washington Gardener magazine. Our content is aimed at gardening enthusiasts, people who grow everything, from edibles to ornamentals, natives to exotics. If it grows in our area, that's what we talk about. Welcome to episode 274 of the GardenDC podcast. In this episode, we talk with Janet Evans, Associate Director, McLean Library and Archives at the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, all about the fascinating history of the Philadelphia Flower Show. The plant profile is on California poppy, and we share what's going on in the garden, as well as some upcoming local gardening events in the What's New segment. We close out with the last word on brewing success in the garden from Christy Page of Green Prints. This episode, we're joined by Janet Evans. She is Associate Director with the McLean Library and Archives at the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, also known as PHS. Welcome, Janet.
Thank you, Kathy. I'm happy to be here.
Great to have you on. We're going to be talking about PHS, PFS, the flower show, and the great history of both. But before we dive into all of that, Janet, we like to ask our guests here on the GardenDC podcast, were they born with chlorophyll in their veins and a green thumb?
That's a great question. Let me say that I adore plants. I am a great admirer of plants. Anytime I visit any place in the world, I will visit the gardens there. I'm not the best gardener in the world, but I have great admiration for plant people because the magic that they're able to create in their gardens is just astonishing to me.
And so you're a librarian by background, is that correct?
Yes, I'm a librarian by background.
And did you major in library science? Did you fall in love with books as a kid, I'm imagining?
I have to admit, I did work in libraries as in high school, and then I graduated from college and then went on to library school. So yeah, I've always been a book person.
And I think a lot of our listeners are book people too, especially gardening books.
Absolutely.
How did you come to be at PHS and the McLean Library?
So prior to working at PHS, I worked in the research library at the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia, which is just down the street, in fact, from PHS. And I was there. And then when the position opened years ago, to be honest, at PHS, I grabbed it.
And you're surrounded by plant people every day, right?
I am. And they're the best kind of people.
And I'm sure a lot of that plant love has rubbed off on you. So I'm gonna ask you to name some favorites, like maybe a favorite houseplant, favorite flower.
Well, I do have an orchid collection at home and really enjoy orchids. So they entrance me.
Yeah, and it's one of like potato chips, right? You just can't have one.
That's exactly true.
So, and you get to see lots of beautiful orchids, of course, at the annual flower show, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and the orchids that will be on particular exhibit this year. But first, we're going to dial back to the history of PHS. So it was founded in Pennsylvania.
Founded in 1827. And if I might, I'd like to kind of dive back even some years prior to that time to how did the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society come to be in Philadelphia. If you look back in the 18th century, you have John Bartram and his son in Philadelphia. They traveled along the East Coast. They collected plants and they sent these plants and seeds to recipients in Europe. And they established Bartram's Garden, which is today the oldest botanical garden in North America. You have organizations like the American Philosophical Society, founded by Ben Franklin, as he founded many things in Philadelphia. And that organization was charged with pursuing useful knowledge. So certainly plant-related things fell in that area. Toward the end of the 18th century, you have David Landreth coming to Philadelphia and starting his seed company, and that's the oldest seed company in America. There's another seed merchant at that time. His name was Bernard McMahon. He had a seed store on Chestnut Street in Philadelphia, and he grew on the seeds that were brought back from the Lewis and Clark expedition. He also started something called the Philadelphia Horticultural Society in 1811. But because he died not too long after that, it really never went anywhere as the Philadelphia Horticultural Society. 1812, you've got the Academy of Natural Sciences, the Natural History Museum. So I'm saying all of this just to say that in Philadelphia, in the Delaware Valley, there was really historically a great interest amongst the citizens in the natural world, in the plant world. So it's really not surprising that by the time you get to 1827, you have people who are interested in organizing a horticultural society. The society members were made up of civic leaders and farmers and people in the nursery and seed business. They would have monthly meetings. They would bring in their plants. They would exhibit amongst themselves, and they would talk plants. This was really a time when new plants were coming into America. They were coming in from all over the world, and people were just absolutely fascinated with these new plants that were coming in, and they wanted to grow them, they wanted to possess them. So the people who organized for PHS at that time, that was definitely a main occupation. But when you look through the history of PHS over time, another theme that runs through PHS is a desire for improving the beauty of the city, for recommending trees to be planted, for recommending that the park systems be put into place. So these are kind of threads that fall within the whole history of PHS. After a couple years, the members decided that it would be a great time to invite the public into one of these expositions. So that's what happened. In June of that year, we had our first public flower show. It was, in fact, the first public flower show in America, and it was a day-long show where people got a chance to see fruits and flowers and plants. And at that show, the most interesting plant, as we see now in retrospect, was the introduction and the showing of the poinsettia. That was the first time that people saw the poinsettia. It was shipped to Bartram's garden, and Bartram's people exhibited it there at the show. It was a plant coming in from Mexico. And of course, today it's just this iconic holiday plant. We can't imagine not knowing what it looks like, but it was a real curiosity at the time. So a lot of these shows were to exhibit things coming in to the Philadelphia community, and sometimes being national introductions as well. So we had shows throughout the 19th century in various places. By the time we get past the Civil War, people wanted to have their own horticultural hall. So members got together and built a horticultural hall on Broad Street in Philadelphia. And that was the venue for shows from about 1867 up until 1917. It was an opportunity to hold shows there. It was a place that we could rent out to other functions, and it was a meeting place for the society. Depending on who was kind of in charge of PHS, sometimes these public shows would be in the spring, sometimes they would be in the fall. When they were in the fall, it was an opportunity for people to show their bounty. And it was, in fact, we probably had more autumn shows at that time than spring shows. Another kind of show that we did for many years was something called a chrysanthemum show. That show was also an autumn show held in November. This was around the end of the 19th century up through the 1920s. What happened was that people went to the Centennial Exposition in Philadelphia in 1876, and for the first time they saw the Japanese varieties of chrysanthemums and were quite entranced with them. And so these shows became an annual thing, not just in Philadelphia, but cities all along the East Coast would have chrysanthemum shows. And if you've ever been to the chrysanthemum show at Longwood, you get a sense of the kind of growing that happened at these shows. I should say that 1829 was also the year that PHS welcomed women as members. And women do play a role in our flower shows as time progressed. The shows that we think of today that are the spring shows in March really got going in the mid 1920s and forward. And at that time, PHS partnered with florists, partnered with nurseries, and held these multi-day shows in a building in West Philadelphia called the Commercial Museum. Those shows were held there from the mid 1920s until the 1960s. Those shows consisted of 3 different kinds of competitors. You had commercial growers, people like Burpees. Burpees showed every year, and Dreer. You had Bobbington Atkins. You had Stiers, and they would have their own displays, and they competed amongst themselves. You then also had this other group called private growers, and these were the people who owned the large estates in and around Philadelphia. And these would have been large properties with large gardens and a lot of gardeners and greenhouses. And so it was very typical to have a showing of Mr. So and so's orchid collection, and they were the private growers. The third group are what were known as and called the women's classes. These were the women's garden clubs that had started in Philadelphia. And in fact, some of those clubs are still exhibiting at PHS. But at that time, they would put in gardens on display, or they would do table arrangements or floral arrangements. I should say that one of the major collections that happened during that time period was the collection of acacias that Joseph Widener exhibited every year. And these were grown and in the greenhouses and were for the flower show. And they were shown every year up until 1940, when Joseph Widener was donating his art collection to the National Gallery of Art, and he also donated his acacia collection to the National Botanical Garden. This was also a time when we had some exhibitors who had been with us since the 1920s and 30s and are still today exhibiting. For example, you have what was the Pennsylvania School of Horticulture for Women, that became Temple University, and Temple has been with us for many, many years. Bartlett Tree Care Operation has been with us all this time, at first as exhibitors, and now Bartlett Tree Care does tree care update programs at the flower show. So we continued up until 1964 at the Commercial Museum, and we were then told, I wasn't there, but PHS was told that they had to stop using the commercial museum because that building was slated for demolition. So the nurserymen and the florists who had always been part of the show decided, okay, we will sit out the show until such time as the new Philadelphia Civic Center will be built, which was slated to be built 4 years later. But at that time, PHS's leader was Ernesta Drinker Ballard, and she was absolutely convinced that you had to continue doing the show. She felt that if the show was held in abeyance for several years, people would just forget about it, that it would no longer be a tradition of going to the show. So she went ahead and produced the show. In the first year in 1965, she was in the Armory of First City Troop. It was a smaller location. It was right downtown, and she did that show. PHS ran the shows from then on. The Civic Center did open up their exhibition hall, their big exhibition hall in 1968. Prior to that, for a couple years, PHS was doing shows in the basement of that building until such time as the exhibition hall was open. And that was a big expanse in terms of size. It was 6 acres and it grew every year in terms of the exhibitors who participated. One of the things that Ernesta can be credited with is that she helped create that part of the show that we call the horticourt. And that's a part of the show where people, amateurs, come in with their plants and they can exhibit their plants, many of which are just simply grown to perfection. But she started the horticourt and really increased that whole competitive class area. We did 1976, it was the country's bicentennial. So the organizers of the show really wanted to invite somebody special that year to judge the show. So they invited Princess Grace of Monaco, and Princess Grace used to be Grace Kelly, the movie star, and Grace Kelly was born and raised in Philadelphia. So she came to the show that year, and in fact, she herself was a practitioner of the floral arts, and she was very much interested in floral arrangements, pressed plants, and so on. Another person long associated with the show was Lyndon Pennock Jr. He and his father had a floral shop on Chestnut Street back in the 1930s, and even then they were exhibiting in the show. He retired from that floral shop and he lived in his home in Abington, which was called Meadowbrook Farm. And Meadowbrook Farm, he developed the gardens there and invited people to see those gardens. Mr. Pennock died in 2003 and he bequeathed Meadowbrook Farm to PHS. So that's one of our public landscapes that we in the 1980s and 1990s, there was a real effort to expand the show by going international and inviting exhibitors from around the world to exhibit. And really, that trend has never stopped. When I talk about this year's show, we will have people from overseas in the show as well. 1996, which Kathy, I think you had mentioned that you do go to the show. That's when we moved to the Pennsylvania Convention Center in downtown Philadelphia. And again, that was a big jump from 6 acres to 11 acres, much larger facility with much more opportunity for doing ancillary events. It was centrally located so that it was easily accessible by regional rail and mass transit. Is a whole different vibe in coming to the Pennsylvania Convention Center. One of the things that happened that we realized when we came to the convention center was we have always relied on our volunteers. To this day, we have thousands of volunteers who participate in the show. But we realized we really needed a whole new army of volunteers who we call the InfoNet. These are people who help our guests when they come to the convention center. They point out where the exhibits are. They give out information. They're on the show floor. They're handing out show maps. They're greeting customers and clients as they come in. And they have really made the experience of our guests a very wonderful thing because they're able to help them be oriented to the convention center. So we held and shows at the PCC right up and through 2020. Then in 2021 and 2022, we took the show outside and we held the show instead of in March. Those shows were in June, and they were located in a park in South Philadelphia, a beautiful setting. It was a whole different atmosphere to have a show outdoors in June, a completely different plant palette. We were able to invite some exhibitors who hadn't exhibited in our show before, and in that first year, our theme was habitat, and we invited Wamboy Ippolito, who is a horticulturist and a landscape designer. She's from East Africa, and she put in an exhibit in 2021 that got Best in Show. I mean, it just blew everybody away. We also have some exhibitors who started exhibiting for the first time at the outdoor shows and continue with us when we went back to the Pennsylvania Convention Center in 2023 and went indoors. So that's kind of where we are in terms of taking us right up to close to the present. And the history of the flower show really is a good fit for this year's theme, which is Rooted Origins of American Gardening, because what we wanted to do this year was to ask people to think about how they're connected to plants. And this approach for the exhibitors could be something like looking back at a historical moment in garden or landscape history and playing off of that. Or it could be personal reflections, what they grew up with, who taught them to garden, what was their grandparents' garden like, what foods did they eat when they took the vegetables out of their garden, what family traditions did they have. So this is what this year's show is all about.
I'm looking forward to seeing some of those new exhibits, of course, and how people interpret it, because every year, no matter what the theme is, I try to think of how the show is going to look. You anticipate what you're going to see, and I can never guess. I'm always wrong. Yeah. Even I think the year of the national parks, I was like, okay, so it's going to be very woodsy and this and that. But then I was like, oh, then they had Hawaii, and then they had some other landscapes that I didn't think about in national parks. So I was like, it's always interesting.
That, to me, that was in 2016. That was a real eye-opener in terms of the kind of exhibits that were on display. And that was also an anniversary show. It was to call attention to the 100th year of the National Park Service. And people, when you go to the national parks, you can get your park passport stamps. We did the same thing at that show, and people could go around and get their stamps from visiting different exhibits, which was a lot of fun.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
Get low-maintenance alternatives to lawns with Ground Cover Revolution by Kathy Jentz. Reducing the lawn is among the biggest trends in homeownership, with an endless stream of homeowners looking for an eco-friendly alternative to a traditional turfgrass lawn. In the last few years alone, over 23 million Americans converted part of the lawn to a natural landscape, and now they're looking to do even more. The biggest challenge to adopting this new ideal of the perfect lawn? Knowing how and when to replace your turf and which plants are the best ones for the job. Ground Cover Revolution is here with all the answers you need, and some you didn't even know you needed. Included are 40 in-depth profiles of plants that are perfect choices for replacing a grass lawn. There are options for sun, for shade, for dry and wet sites, and for various climates around the globe. There are choices that bloom, options that are evergreen, and selections that are deer-resistant. Kathy Jentz has also included an incredibly useful chart that gives you all the specifics on each of the 40 choices for quick reference and to make your ground cover selection process even easier. Whether you want to replace the entire lawn or just reduce the amount of land dedicated to turf, Ground Cover Revolution will help you usher in a new and improved idea of what a beautiful lawn should be. Ground Cover Revolution is available now wherever you buy books, including Amazon.com and Bookshop.org.
So this year, 250th of the United States of America, semi-sesquicentennial, if I'm saying that correctly. And next year, so since PHS was established 1827, that will be 200th for PHS. So I'm assuming that will be even more of the theme, is focusing more on maybe PHS's own history.
Yes, it just is this sort of triple whammy. This year is the 250th for the nation. Next year is our 200th. And then 2 years after that will be 200th year of our flower show. So yeah, we have a lot that we can explore. But this year there is an entrance garden, and it's called the Forest Floor Garden. And it is made up of 4 garden beds with their own plant sub-personalities. One bed is going to have topiaries and standards and formal shapes. Another bed is going to be forced Sarracenia, coniferous plants along a water's edge, which that should be interesting. I'm really looking forward to that one. There will be an orchid bed, and I'll also pay attention to that, and also bonsai. So that's going to be the entrance garden. Beyond that, we're going to have floral exhibits. And the one floral exhibit that I wanted to mention was Robertson's Florist and Events. They are now celebrating their 100th year in business. This is a Philadelphia florist company that's in the Chestnut Hill area of Philadelphia. They've exhibited at the show for over 40 years. So they're going to explore the design trends through that time period of what they were creating over the last 100 years. So that should be a lot of fun to see. We've got an international florist showcase this year, and we have designers, one from Spain, one from Belgium, one from New Zealand, and one from Hungary. So that's going to be a whole new element. As a nod to the 200th year, there's a special exhibit. It's a landscape exhibit, and we've invited 4 landscape design studios from around the country to exhibit. They'll each have a piece of that exhibit here. This is called the American Landscape Showcase. And Edda Studio, they're from San Francisco, and this is their first year in the show. And they're going to be talking about California natives. Another participant in this American landscape design area is called Unknown Studio, and they're from Baltimore. And their piece is called The Ghost Forest, and they're going to do an homage to the American chestnut, all about the chestnut, how it was a key forest tree in the mid-Atlantic, how it disappeared, and restoration efforts. Another one is going to be a design studio called Design Under Sky, and they have one exhibit called Decadence, I think is how you pronounce it. It looks like almost like decadence. But it's really looking at how plants function in damaged urban landscapes. And they're going to interrogate what is a weed and really get us thinking about what is growing through asphalt and concrete and what is the function of the plants that we may not even see until we look. And so that should be interesting. Kelly D. Norris is coming back. He had exhibited in the show, and his area of this exhibit, he's from Des Moines, Iowa. He is doing something called What Do We Plant From Here? And he's going to be looking at the history of native plant gardening in America over the past 250 years. So that is the 4 invited landscape design people from around the U.S. So that should be quite interesting.
Yeah, I think that's going to be fascinating. And Kelly has been a guest on this podcast, and we'll put a link to that episode in the show notes.
Oh, that's
because
great.
I know his exhibit that he did a few years ago at the flower show won awards, and people still talk about it to this day. So I know he's probably pretty nervous about this one, but I think he's going to do a great job.
Oh, that's great. That's really great. Yeah, I'm excited about it. We do have landscape people who will be playing on this theme. And one of our longtime exhibitors is the Men's Gardening Club. The Men's Garden Club. They're going to take the idea of rooted, but they're actually really going to talk about roots, which I think will be a lot of fun, really exploring the function of roots in plants. And I think that will be a very interesting exhibit. We have an educational branch of exhibitors who exhibit at the show, and these are colleges and high schools who exhibit. And they're one of my favorites because you just never know what they're going to come up with. Some of them have been with us for many, many years, and they are taking the whole idea of looking to the past, looking at a moment in time, looking at a garden influence and playing on that idea in their exhibit. For example, Bucks County Community College, which has this terrific floral design program, is doing an exhibit called Rooted in Art. And that's because Bucks County Community College, the campus is what was the home of Stella Elkins Tyler, her estate, and she was an artist and had a beautiful garden on that property. So they'll be looking at her work and her vision. There's another one, the Mercer County Community College. They're in New Jersey, and they're going to be looking at the history of horticulture in the Garden State. They're calling their exhibit Peter Henderson to the Present, the Horticulturists of the Garden State. And I'm looking forward to that. We have in our library, we have rare books in our library and a very extensive collection of seed catalogs and nursery catalogs. And I always liked to look at the Peter Henderson catalogs. He was somebody who got started right after the Civil War. He wrote what was then a best-selling book called Gardening for Profit. It sold many, many thousands of copies because people were looking at ways to employ themselves after the Civil War. And he was an advocate of market gardens. So these would be small but intensely gardened spaces, maybe 1 to 2 acres. They were generally, market gardens were generally on the edges of towns and cities, but close enough to the towns and cities to bring this produce and the fruit to market. And so this was a way for people to earn money. And he really specialized in market gardening. So I'm quite keen to see that one.
Yeah, and I agree with you that the educational exhibits, usually that's like the back right corner. I'm not sure if that's going to be the same location this year on the show floor, but I usually go straight to those and skip the front design ones because there's always huge crowds, and come back to those when the crowds are a little bit less. And I find I get so much more out of those educational gardens, chock full of ideas and inspiration for the home gardener.
Yeah, they really are. They are. And I'm just always amazed at the creativity of those, of the of all the exhibits. People always say, what's your favorite show? And I have to, they're always my favorite. There's always something that catches my eye there. So that's what to look for this year.
And I was going to ask about, you were mentioning that you have old seed catalogs at the McLean Library, and I'm imagining vintage garden books, maybe some older. Is this open to just PHS members? Can the public come and visit the library?
The public is invited to come to visit the library for the historic collections, the rare books, the seed and nursery catalogs. We would have to make an appointment, which is not a problem. They can contact me, and I can make that happen.
Good to know. And I love when you were talking about the history, that how the show persevered and didn't skip a year, because one of my top questions was going to be, were there ever any lapses or breaks in the show? And the fact that it survived the Great Depression, world wars, the COVID epidemic, when I remember in 2020, literally the day getting home from the Philadelphia Flower Show was the shutdown. So it just squeaked under the door, right? And then the next 2 years having it outdoors in June, and it was hot and it was a lot. Logistically, I'm sure, to have it that way. But the fact that it wasn't canceled was, I thought, a great triumph those years.
I have to agree. Now, I will confess, we did not have the big spring shows during World War II between 1943 and through 1946. We went back to having the spring shows in 1947. It was really a matter of resources. It was very difficult for people. There were gas shortages. There were shortages with heating greenhouses. So it just wasn't a possibility at that time. However, one thing we did do, PHS took a role in educating the public on how to put in a victory garden. So we had these victory garden harvest shows during that time. And it was a way to show people what they could grow, because people were, of course, encouraged to grow their own food in order to feed themselves during wartime.
And I think that mission continues today with PHS. I know I'm a member, and in the magazine and the emails we get, there's always a feature usually on some of the inner city food growing programs and other things that PHS does for beautification in the city and elsewhere. So that's where some of your dollars are going. I know people complain, it's not cheap sometimes to attend the flower show. It's a little bit better, I think, if you can join PHS and then attend, then you might save a few dollars that way. But I think it's worth it knowing where your money is going.
That is where the money goes. It does support our greening and gardening efforts in the city. And you mentioned what we do. We work with over 200 community gardens in the city. And we have a tool library where the community gardeners can borrow tools, and they get education programs and share information. We have tree tenders. These are volunteers who plant trees in the city and surrounding suburbs, and we plant 3,000, the volunteers plant 3,000 trees a year. We also have our public landscapes that I mentioned. I mentioned Meadowbrook Farm, which is open from April to, it is free. It's a beautiful site. It's a wonderful way to spend an afternoon. We have our pop-up gardens, both on South Street in Philadelphia, then another one in the Manayunk neighborhood. And these are gardens. They're open during the week. In the evenings, you can get a drink, you can get something to eat, you can enjoy the garden. And then on the weekend, they're open for extended hours. We also have public landscapes along the parkway, the Benjamin Franklin Parkway. Beginning Love Park is next to the City Hall.
Mm-hmm.
And the parkway extends as far as the Art Museum of Philadelphia. So we have plantings at Love Park, we have plantings at Logan Square, at Rodin Museum, and right up to the Art Museum with the Azalea Garden there. And we also do plantings not on the parkway, but near the parkway at the Eastern State Penitentiary, which is a historic penitentiary, which is within walking distance of the parkway. So yeah, your ticket dollars do go to making Philadelphia a more beautiful city and working with our partners in various community groups throughout the city. I do want to mention one thing that we started a few years ago. We do also have something called twilight ticketing, and that's coming in at 4 and staying until 8. So a lot of people do that and enjoy the show in the evenings in a more relaxed way and can enjoy the show, and they are buying a ticket at a reduced price. So that's something I wanted to mention.
That's a great idea. And the crowds generally seem to wane around 3 p.m., I find, every day. So that's perfect timing, too. And so let's talk about some of the big personalities of PHS in its history. So you touched on Lyndon Pennick, who donated Meadowbrook Farm, and I visited there a few times and seen the house, and he's such a outsized personality. I think he did President Nixon's daughter's weddings flowers.
He did.
Yeah.
He did Trisha's wedding.
Mm-hmm.
And he also decorated the White House for a few Christmases and did the holiday decorations there. Yeah, he was a designer for debutantes and other galas and balls held in Philadelphia, and he had quite an eye for design. And when you walk through the gardens, you can see his legacy there. He also exhibited for many years at the flower show. At Meadowbrook Farm always had something that was reminiscent of Meadowbrook itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wish I had been around then to even have met him. And I know another great benefactor of the show, Mrs. Hamilton. I got to visit her garden before she passed away, but I didn't get to meet her in person. She was at one of her, I think she was in Rhode Island at that point. But every time I would go to the flower show and I would look at the horticourt competition, you know, there would be a teddy bear topiary, and I would look at the tag and I would see her name. And then I would see, you know, some beautiful terrariums and I would see her name, and I would see some beautiful begonias and I would see her name. And I'm like, half the plants in this place are from this lady, Hamilton, I don't know who she is. And then finally got that invite to see her home garden. But then a few years ago, I think she left a legacy that it's now the Hamilton Horticourt named after her.
That's right. Yeah. The Hamilton, we were very grateful to her legacy, and we're able to redesign the horticourt and redo the staging and expand it. And so we were quite grateful. And that was in 2013 when we opened up the Hamilton Horticourt. And for many people, that's one of their favorite parts of the show to visit. I know you had mentioned that you like the miniature settings. They're a part of the design area at the show. I'm with you. I try to get there when I can before PHS opens to the public, and get a chance to see those.
Yeah, I think so. The horticourt, for those who aren't familiar with it, that's again the floral and the plant competitions that anybody could enter. So if you have, you know, a succulent that you've been growing, an African violet, some forced bulbs, so they have many categories for those. And then they also have those design competitions, which are something made from flowers. It could be like the fashions, like a dress made from flowers, a shoe, a bracelet. Sometimes it's made from flower parts. And then the miniatures are little vignettes, like dollhouse size vignettes made with living plants in them.
And again, I mean, the creativity just always overwhelms me with those. Mm-hmm. So those are fun areas of the show to explore. We do also have sort of ancillary parts of the show. Mm-hmm. We've got a kids cocoon area for kids to experiment with various horticulturally related activities. We have Artisans Row, which is an opportunity to see some works. And let me think, what else do we have that I'm missing?
Can't forget the Butterflies Live.
We can't forget the Butterflies Live. Yeah, that's a big draw. And that is also at the convention center in the what's called the Grand Hall, mm-hmm. which is one of the large exhibit spaces.
And there's also plenty of food. There's usually bar stations around the floor and like food that you can eat out of hand, but then also little cafe areas off the floor. And of course, across the street, you have the Reading Terminal, which is what I recommend to go for when you go for a meal break.
Yeah, that's a public market that has been around. I won't say it's the oldest one mm-hmm. in the U.S., but it's a fun place to go to grab a lunch mm-hmm. and all kinds of stands and food choices.
And then some of the other exhibits on the floor, like the gold medal winners that PHS names every year, a gold medal plant mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. or plants, plural, to add to that collection. So you can see what does best in the Mid-Atlantic, and I think our listeners will be super interested in that.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of people, if it's their first time going to the flower show, they come for gardening. They're looking for gardens. A lot of the show is actually high-end floral art. It's floral competition as well.
And that can really just sort of blow you away once you look at the intricacy of the floral art. And we have both in the Hall A with the landscape exhibitors, we also have the floral arrangements mm-hmm. and floral design. But that's not limited to that area. We talked about competitive classes, mm-hmm. and there is the artistic class as well. And those are arrangements that are on display and changed out daily. So they're fun to look at. Mm-hmm. I do want to mention Know to Grow. Know to Grow is the lecture series that we have at the flower show, and we extend it throughout, even not at the flower show, but throughout the year. But that's a great place. We have on the website, you can look at what day you're planning to come to the show and try to sit in on one of the Know to Grow gardening experts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've spoken at that previously, and I'm going to say when you said sit in, Janet, that's a key word. Because when you feel like it and you want to sit down because you've been walking and seeing so much, that's when you want to circle something to go sit down and learn something at the same time and maybe get something to eat too. Mm-hmm. But definitely, I would say budget your time well is how I'm going to say it, because you almost can't see it all. So you've got the huge exhibit halls, the competitive classes, the horticourt, the educational exhibits, Butterflies Live, etc. Then you have the entire marketplace.
Yeah.
That's a lot of shopping, a lot of seeing, a lot of stuff. So just pace yourself is what I'd say, especially if it's going to be your first time.
Absolutely. And we open at 10 in the morning and we're open until 8 at night. And so you really can spend as much time as you like at the show.
And I was going to say that you had mentioned that you are the voice that we hear at the end of the day.
At the end
telling
of the day,
us we have to leave the show. Do you have other duties on site at the show?
So I do the announcements in the second half of the day. Somebody else takes care of it to open the show in the morning. But I also do customer service, most of which is through our website. We have on our website, phsonline.org, at the bottom of every page, there's a link that says Ask PHS, and that opens up to a knowledge base that you can search, but it also you can fill out a form there, and we get many flower show related questions coming in through Ask PHS, which I manage. And in fact, that's a way people, if they want to contact me about the library, they can go to Ask PHS, and I'll be sure to see their questions.
So listeners who want to contact you would go to phsonline.org, correct?
That's correct.
And then Ask PHS.
Yep, because I would definitely see those questions.
And or hunt you down at the show. So you had mentioned at the beginning your love of orchids and collecting them, and we'd interviewed about the first lady orchids that are going to be on display, the Cattleyas, that are going to be part of this year's special 250th exhibition.
That's
and so we'll include again in the show notes a link to that episode if listeners missed that one. But are there any other highlights commemorating the 250th of the country? I know Philadelphia itself, of course, is going to be doing things throughout the year to celebrate that too.
Philadelphia itself is going to be doing things throughout the year to celebrate, and this is really kind of the kickoff event for that, because it's a big event, and it's a wonderful way to draw attention to our 250th year. So yeah, I'm excited. I hope you are too.
Speaking of kickoff, to me, the Philadelphia Flower Show is the start of spring.
Absolutely.
It's always like, this is the little breath that gets you through the end of winter, bridging into the start of spring, and you get a couple weeks head start. All those forced flowers into bloom, all those vegetables that have been forced, and so you get to like immerse yourself directly into spring a little bit early, and then you leave with so many ideas and so much inspiration.
Well, that's
so. In wrapping up, Janet, on the PHS long history, the flower show's long history, what are we looking at in the next few years for the future of both PHS and the flower show?
Well, we will continue with our neighborhood efforts to green up Philadelphia and continue to fine-tune the public landscape programs that we have. One project that's coming into being has to do with planting up gateway roads into Philadelphia. Going to be very exciting, and that's a welcoming aspect for people coming into Philadelphia to celebrate our 250th year. So we're involved in that as well, and so we're quite excited about that. We will be conducting a gardening contest this summer for people in Philadelphia, and they'll hear more about that at the flower show. So stay tuned.
Exciting. Well, thank you so much, Janet. Any memories about your career at PHS that you want to share?
Just that it's, I've just had an opportunity to, and I continue to have this opportunity to work with some extraordinary people who have in many ways enriched my life by their love for plants and their passion for connecting people to horticulture. I very much believe very strongly in that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Janet.
Oh, thank you.
GardenDC will be back after this short break.
In the book The Urban Garden by Kathy Jentz and Terry Spate, you'll find dozens of inspiring and creative ways to grow flowers, shrubs, vegetables, herbs, and other plants in small spaces and with a limited budget. Whether you want to grow on a balcony, rooftop, front stoop, or a tiny urban patio, turn your growing dreams into reality and build a gorgeous and unique garden that showcases your personal style while still being functional and productive. With the genius ideas and resourceful tactics found here, you'll be maximizing yields and beauty from every square inch of your space. No matter what you grow, the 101 amazing growing ideas found in the urban garden will turn your tiny urban yard into a treasure trove of green you'll be proud to share with family and friends. Buy your copy today at your local retail bookseller or order it online now at Amazon.com or bookshop.org.
California Poppy Plant Profile. California Poppy, Eschscholzia californica, is a wildflower. They have bright orange, yellow, white or rose-colored flowers that bloom in late spring. The foliage is a distinctive blue-green with a feathery, lacy texture. They are also known as golden poppy, California sunlight, or cup of gold. They are the official state flower of California and are native to the southwestern United States and Mexico. They are hardy to USDA zones 8 to 10. They need a location with at least 6 hours of full direct sun. California poppies prefer fast-draining, poor to average soils. Avoid heavy, wet clay, which can cause root rot. Direct sowing is best, as they dislike root disturbance. Scatter the seeds on prepared soils. There is no need to cover them with other soil or mulch. In the Mid-Atlantic, we grow them as a cool season annual. In our region, it's best to direct sow California poppy seeds in late autumn for early spring growth, or in early spring as soon as the soil can be worked. Water them sparingly. They are drought tolerant once established. They generally do not need to be fertilized, as too much fertilizer reduces blooms. To encourage more flowers, remove the spent blooms, but leave a few up to self-seed for next year. They are generally considered to be deer-resistant due to their bitter taste and toxicity. California poppies attract native bees and many other pollinators. California poppy, you can grow that. What's new in the garden this week? Well, in the garden, the snowcrete has finally melted, so I'm seeing snowdrops and winter aconite popping up. In garden tips that we shared on our social media this week, we talked about late winter gardening tasks, including that you should wait to cut back dead, hollow, or pithy plant stems and remove leaf litter until daytime temperatures are consistently at or above 50 degrees for 5 to 7 consecutive days, which typically occurs here in our region in late March to mid-April. Delaying cleanup protects overwintering bees and pollinators. In local gardening events, Rooting DC is taking place once again, and Washington Gardener will be exhibiting at it, and I will be speaking there on seed saving. You can register for that for free on eventbrite.com. That is taking place on Saturday, March 10th at the Eastern High School in Washington, D.C. Then on that same date, Saturday, March 7th, there is a special garden tour of the witch hazels at Green Spring Gardens at 10 a.m. An Extension Master Gardener will showcase the nationally accredited witch hazel collection of over 200 specimens at Green Spring Gardens in Alexandria, Virginia. To register for that, go to fairfaxcounty.gov/park/park-takes. And then Longwood Gardens invites guests to experience winter in the new light with the opening of Garden Glow, a luminous after-hours experience where blooms shimmer, shadows dance, and the gardens come alive after dark. This will be on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday evenings through March 8th. Garden Glow transforms Longwood into an immersive landscape of light, art, and atmosphere. So you can purchase your Garden Glow tickets at longwoodgardens.org/gardenglow. And you can also go there for more tickets and information for other Longwood events. And Longwood Gardens, of course, is located in Kennett Square, Pennsylvania. Happy gardening!
This is The Last Word by Christy Page at Food Gardening Network with Brewing Success in the Garden, How Compost and Compost Tea Boost Yields, Flavor, and Nutrition by Don Nicholas. Few gardening practices deliver more bang for the buck than using compost and compost tea. These two natural powerhouses not only improve soil structure and fertility, but also help your crops grow stronger, tastier, and more nutrient dense. Over the years, I've seen firsthand how adding these simple inputs has dramatically increased my tomato and pepper yields, and I'm convinced every food gardener can benefit, whether you're working in containers, raised beds, or traditional in-ground plots. Now, what's the difference between compost and compost tea? Compost is decomposed organic matter like garden trimmings, food scraps, leaves, and manure, that becomes a rich, dark, earthy amendment full of nutrients and beneficial microbes. Think of it as a soil conditioner and slow-release fertilizer. While compost tea is a liquid brew made by steeping compost in water, sometimes with a touch of molasses or kelp to feed the microbes, it's strained and applied to the soil or as a foliar spray, giving plants a quick microbial and nutrient boost. Both work in harmony. Compost builds your soil foundation, while compost tea acts like a tonic throughout the growing season. So for container gardening, containers can dry out quickly and deplete nutrients faster than in-grow soil. Compost is your insurance policy here. As far as raised beds, well, they're my favorite setup. Easy to manage, rich soil, and fewer weeds. Compost plays a starring role here. Just go ahead and prep 2 to 3 inches of compost into 6 to 8 inches of soil before planting. This sets the stage for healthy seedlings. Now, in-ground gardening, if you're working in native soil, compost transforms tired dirt into productive earth. So you're going to build your soil, spread 1 to 2 inches of compost across the garden, and till or fork it in every spring and fall. Over time, soil structure, water holding capacity, and nutrient levels improve dramatically. Now you really need to worry about timing compost and tea throughout the season. For seed starting, add a small amount of screen compost to seed starting mixes for extra nutrients. A weak compost tea can be used to water seedling once they have true leaves. When you're transplanting, dip the transplant's roots in diluted compost tea before planting. This inoculates roots with beneficial microbes for a strong start. Mid-season, well, side dress with compost and refresh beds with compost tea when plants show heavy feeding signs, such as yellowing leaves and slowed growth. Harvest time. Compost applications improve late-season soil health, while tea helps plants push out flavorful fruits and vegetables until frost. Post-harvest. Add compost to beds or containers before winter to prepare for next year. Here's a simple compost tea recipe. Use 1 shovel full of finished compost, screened if possible, 5 gallons of non-chlorinated water, 1 tablespoon unsulfured molasses, 1 tablespoon liquid kelp. Steep 24 to 36 hours in a bucket, stirring occasionally or using an aquarium bubbler for aeration. Strain through cheesecloth before spraying. Use within 24 hours for maximum microbial activity. So, as a raised bed and container gardener myself, I can't overstate how much compost and compost tea has improved both yields and flavor in my garden. Tomatoes are richer, peppers more abundant, and leafy greens more nutritious. Whether you're brewing your own tea or buying compost by the bag, these natural strategies will make your gardening more productive and your harvest more delicious. This has been The Last Word by Christy Page at foodgardening.com.
Thank you for listening to GardenDC. This episode was made by real humans. It was produced and hosted by myself, Kathy Jentz. The Let the Sunshine music interludes are by James Mulvaney. If you like this episode, you may also enjoy listening to GardenDC Podcast Episode 230, Secrets of the Philadelphia Flower Show, Episode 121, PHS Gold Medal Plants, Episode 260, Orchids of the First Ladies, Episode 226, Designing Your Natural Garden with Kelly D. Norris. You can become a listener supporter by going to the link in our show notes. Another way to support this podcast is to subscribe to our monthly digital publication, Washington Gardener Magazine. To do so, go to WashingtonGardener.com or WashingtonGardener.blogspot.com. You can find Washington Gardener on Twitter or X, Instagram, Threads, Blue Sky, and Pinterest at WDC Gardener, and on Facebook at Washington Gardener Magazine. And be sure to leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast listening app. Please take a moment to share us on social media with hashtag GardenDC and with your gardening friends so other gardeners can find us too.